My boss took credit for my work, then humiliated me in front of her friends, and when I finally stood up for myself, she tried to blacklist me, so I exposed her in a way she never saw coming and couldn't do anything about. When I was 28, I got a job as a personal assistant to an influencer, but not just any influencer. I'm talking 5 million followers on IG and can ruin you with a single post-level influencer. We'll call her Annie. I worked 24-hour shifts for Annie, 12 hours by her side, 12 hours on call. I was exhausted, but because we spent so much time together, she had full trust in me. At some point, she even started letting me edit her photos, making her waist slimmer before posting. But then one day, she told me to organize a gathering with all her influencer friends for the cookbook she was launching. She offered me a small bonus, and added that I could actually attend this gathering too. This was the first time she'd ever done either of those things, so I was definitely suspicious. But given she was my boss, and I was actually curious to see what the get-togethers were like, I accepted. Big mistake. The weeks leading up to it were relentless. Turns out she didn't even have a cookbook planned. It was my task to create it from scratch in 4 weeks. 100 pages of recipes, designs, her About Me section, everything. I was up to my neck in work. I became a walking zombie, running off a gram of caffeine per day to keep me sane. What's even worse is she took all the credit. We'd be getting our pedicures, and whilst I was researching non-copyrighted gluten-free brownie recipes, she'd be on her phone, talking about how excited she was for the cookbook and how the recipes were all her. This definitely frustrated me, but I bit my tongue and accepted this was show business. And then just days before the gathering, she started acting weird. She became more snappy, paranoid, but only around me. She said she liked the cookbook though, so I had no idea what the problem was. All I know is that the day before, she called me and angrily barked orders at me to 5 times the amount of food I'm cooking for the party tomorrow. I tried to tell her it wasn't possible, but she said to figure it out, and if I can't, I'm fired. I stayed up all night cooking, even paying a private chef $500 to spend the next day helping me. By the time I showed up to the gathering, I hadn't slept in 37 hours. I brought all the meals with me in a minivan that I hired out of my own money, and the first thing I was met with was Annie shouting at me for only being 6 hours early. I didn't have the energy to argue, so I nodded and apologized. I spent the next 6 hours setting everything up, including the food, while Annie just kept trying dresses on. Eventually, people started showing up. Everything was going smoothly, until Annie struck. Me, her, and 2 of her friends were talking about how great the food she made was, when Annie interrupted. You know, I asked Julie over here to make me an omelet once, and she almost set my kitchen on fire. Everyone began chuckling, and because I was too tired to respond, I chuckled too. Well, Annie took this as my approval. Her last boyfriend even left her because of it. She even called me once seriously asking how to turn on the oven. Remember that, Julie? Everyone was laughing so hard they were wheezing. Then someone said, "How do you do it, Annie? You created a whole cookbook in 4 weeks, organized this party, and attended a stray dogs volunteer shelter. You're one of a kind." Just like that, everyone was complimenting Annie. She was basking in it, and I was going to let her, but that's when she took it too far. Before I knew it, Annie was calling me dumb, ditzy, stupid, an idiot, even saying she should fire me, all as a joke. Everyone was doubling over at my expense, but when the conversation shifted back to Annie's recipes, I saw my chance to ruin her. You know, Annie, because you're such an amazing chef, I actually prepared something for you. I went to go get a chef's hat, then came back up to Annie before getting everyone's attention. Some of you might have noticed there's one dessert from the book missing on the tables. That's because Annie wanted to cook it in front of everyone. Her eyes went wide, but before she could protest, everyone erupted in cheers and applause. Now, you may be thinking she could have just refused or exposed me, but I knew Annie, and she was way too image-oriented for that. And so, she nervously strutted to the kitchen with everyone behind her. Some of her friends even live streaming the special moment to their followers. I remember she looked at me with hatred, but I just smiled. Next thing I knew, Annie was struggling to crack an egg, holding a whisk with her thumb and index finger, and putting butter in the oven to melt it. Everyone's faces dropped, as they realized Annie was full of crap. She hadn't created the cookbook, and when she accidentally got flour on her face, she exploded. She screamed out she couldn't do it. She wasn't a chef, and yelled at everyone to stop laughing at her, but nobody did. People were pointing fingers in hysterics. I honestly thought I had won, but that's when she turned to me, and with her acrylic nails jabbed my eyes. This is her fault. I'm suing. Suddenly, everyone turned to me. Before I could respond, Annie grabbed my arm and dragged me into the back. "What the F was that?" she hissed, all pretense of composure gone. I calmly wiped down the counter. "That was you demonstrating your cooking skills, or lack thereof. Do you have any idea what you just did? You humiliated me in front of everyone." "No, Annie. You humiliated yourself by lying about writing a cookbook when you can't even crack an egg properly." Her face contorted with rage. "You're fired. Get your things and get out of my house right now." I nodded, untying my apron. "Fine, but I'm taking copies of all the cookbook materials I created, and I'll be sending invoices for the hundreds of unpaid overtime hours I've worked." "You'll get nothing," she spat. "I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." Who do you think people will believe? Me, with millions of followers, or some nobody assistant? I should have been scared. Should have backed down and begged for my job. But something had broken loose inside me. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, maybe it was months of pent-up resentment, or maybe it was simply standing in my truth for the first time since taking this job. You know what, Annie? I don't care anymore. Take your credit, take your fake cookbook, take your entire fake life, but I'm done letting you take my dignity. I turned to leave, but Annie wasn't finished. She grabbed my arm, spinning me around. "Give me your phone, now." "What? No. I know you have photos of the cookbook development. Give me your phone or I'll call the police and have you arrested for theft of intellectual property." I laughed in disbelief. "Intellectual property? You mean my recipes, my photos, and my work that you're claiming as your own?" Her eyes narrowed. Everything you did while employed by me belongs to me. That was in your contract. I pulled my arm free. I'm leaving now, Annie. No, you're not. She lunged forward, grabbing for my bag where my phone was visible in an outside pocket. I stepped back, but Annie was determined. In the struggle, she knocked over a glass bowl that shattered on the floor. The noise seemed to enrage her further, and she came at me with her hands outstretched, acrylic nails aimed at my face. I raised my arms to protect myself, but not before one of her nails scratched my cheek. I felt a sharp sting and warm blood trickling down my face. The kitchen door burst open. Several guests stood there, including Thomas and Riley, staring in shock at the scene before them. Broken glass everywhere. Me bleeding. Annie looking completely unhinged. "What's going on?" Riley asked, phone still in her hand, potentially recording. Annie immediately switched personas, tears springing to her eyes. She attacked me. After everything I've done for her, she tried to steal my cookbook and attacked me when I caught her. No one looked convinced. My cheek was bleeding, not hers. The broken glass was clearly from her knocking over the bowl. "That's not what happened," I said quietly, pressing a kitchen towel to my cheek. Annie is upset because I exposed that she can't cook anything from her cookbook, because I wrote it, not her. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. "Get out of my house," Annie finally said, voice trembling with rage. "All of you. Party's over." People began awkwardly filing out. I grabbed my bag, making sure my phone was still inside, and headed for the door. I heard Annie behind me, already spinning a narrative to whoever was still listening about how I'd had a mental breakdown from the pressure of assisting someone so successful. Outside, the night air felt shockingly fresh after hours in that tension-filled house. I walked toward my car, not even caring about the possessions I was leaving behind in Annie's apartment. I just needed to get away. "Hey, wait up!" I turned to see Thomas jogging toward me, followed by Riley and a couple others I recognized from the party. "Are you okay?" he asked, gesturing to my cheek. "I'll live," I replied, suddenly feeling the full weight of my exhaustion. I leaned against my car for support. "That was intense," Riley said, looking genuinely concerned. "Has she always been like that with you?" I laughed weakly. "More or less. Usually with fewer witnesses, though." "I got the whole thing on video," Riley admitted, holding up her phone. "Both the cooking disaster and what happened in the kitchen afterward." "I'm so sorry. I started recording because I thought it would be a fun cooking demo, but then—" "No, I'm glad you have it," I said, surprising myself. "At least now there's proof of what really happened." Thomas handed me a business card. "I'm actually a lawyer when I'm not helping Riley with her travel content. If you need help dealing with this situation, legally, give me a call." I took the card, touched by the gesture even though I doubted I could afford legal help. "Thanks. I should probably get going before Annie comes out here and causes another scene." As if on cue, the front door of the house flew open, and Annie appeared, still in her apron, mascara running down her face. "I'm calling the police," she shouted. "Don't think you can just leave after what you did." Thomas stepped forward. "Annie, I strongly advise against making false police reports. Multiple witnesses saw what happened, and there's video evidence." Annie faltered slightly, looking at the small group gathered around me. "She violated her NDA. She told you all about the cookbook." "Actually," Riley said calmly, "you're the one who just confirmed she wrote your cookbook, not you. We were just leaving after an uncomfortable situation, but now that you mention it," Annie's face went pale. She turned and stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind her. "You should go," Thomas advised me, "but keep in touch, okay? This isn't over." He was right about that. I drove to a friend's apartment, the only place I could think to go since I'd been living in Annie's building. The whole way there, my phone blew up with texts from Annie, alternating between threats and attempts to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. My friend Joseph was surprised to see me at his door at 11 p.m. with a bleeding cheek and no belongings, but he let me crash on his couch without too many questions. I fell into an exhausted sleep almost immediately, my body finally shutting down after nearly 40 hours of consciousness. I woke up the next morning to find my phone had died overnight. After borrowing Joseph's charger, I turned it on to find 27 missed calls from Annie and over 50 text messages. The last few were particularly concerning. "I've changed the locks on your apartment. Your stuff is in storage. You have 24 hours to arrange pickup or it's going to charity. I've emailed everyone in my network about your unprofessional behavior. Good luck finding another job in this city. The cookbook deal is proceeding as planned. Try to interfere and I'll sue you for everything you have." Joseph brought me coffee while I scrolled through the messages in disbelief. "Want to tell me what's going on?" he asked gently. I gave him the condensed version, showing him my scratched cheek as evidence. When I finished, he looked genuinely concerned. "You can stay here as long as you need," he offered, "but you should probably talk to a lawyer. This sounds serious." I thought of Thomas's business card, still in my bag. "Yeah, I think you're right." I called Thomas later that morning and explained the situation in more detail. He listened carefully, asking occasional questions about my employment agreement, the cookbook development, and Annie's threats. "Based on what you're describing, you have a strong case for workplace harassment, wage theft for unpaid overtime, and possibly assault charges from last night," he said when I finished. "The question is, what do you want to happen here?" It was a good question. Part of me just wanted to walk away and never think about Annie again. But another part, a stronger part, was tired of being bulldozed by people like her. "I want credit for my work," I finally said, "and I want to be paid fairly for the hours I put in. That's it. I don't want revenge or a public scandal." "That's reasonable," Thomas replied. "Let me make some calls and see what we're dealing with. In the meantime, document everything. Save those texts, write down a timeline of events while it's fresh in your memory, and if your cheek bruises, take photos." Over the next few days, I stayed at Joseph's place while trying to figure out my next steps. Annie continued her campaign against me, escalating from text threats to public Instagram stories where she vaguely referenced a betrayal by someone she'd trusted. She never named me directly, but her followers weren't stupid. They figured out who she was talking about, and my social media accounts were soon flooded with hateful messages from Annie's devoted fans. I went with Joseph to retrieve my belongings from the storage unit Annie had mentioned. Half my stuff was missing, but fortunately I had backed up most of my digital files to cloud storage, including the cookbook files. When I texted Annie about the missing items, she claimed ignorance, suggesting perhaps I had misplaced these items before moving out. 5 days after the party, I met with Thomas at his office. He'd reviewed everything I'd provided and had drafted a demand letter to Annie. This outlines your contributions to the cookbook, requests appropriate credit as the developer and writer, and demands payment for your overtime hours at standard industry rates, he explained, showing me the document. It also addresses the apartment situation and requests the return of any missing property. What happens if she ignores it? I asked, already knowing Annie well enough to anticipate her response. Then we escalate, Thomas said simply. But given the evidence we have, including testimony from party guests and Riley's video, I believe she'll want to settle this quietly. He was wrong. Annie's response came through her own lawyer, a high-priced, aggressive type who claimed I was the one who had violated numerous agreements by attempting to sabotage Ms. I's business relationships and stealing proprietary content. They threatened countersuits that would bankrupt me if I didn't immediately sign a retroactive NDA and drop all claims. When Thomas reported this back to me, I felt a wave of panic. I couldn't afford a lengthy legal battle with someone who had Annie's resources. Maybe I should just give up. That's exactly what she wants you to feel, Thomas said when I expressed these doubts. But here's what you need to know. Annie's on shakier ground than she realizes. Riley's been talking to other influencers who were at the party. Word is spreading about what really happened, and Annie's publisher is getting nervous. Her publisher? I asked, confused. She has a publisher already? Thomas nodded. Apparently, she signed a deal the day before the party, which explains why she was so desperate to prove she had a cookbook ready to go. This new information changed everything. Annie hadn't just been lying to her followers. She'd been lying to a publishing company that had invested real money in her supposed cookbook. What should we do? I asked. I think it's time to approach the publisher directly, Thomas suggested. Not as a threat, but as a potential solution. You have what they need. A real cookbook with tested recipes. Annie has what they want. A name that will sell books. Perhaps there's a middle ground. I wasn't convinced Annie would ever agree to share credit, but I gave Thomas permission to reach out to the publisher. Meanwhile, I focused on finding a new job and apartment, which proved challenging with Annie seemingly working behind the scenes to blacklist me. 2 promising interviews mysteriously fell through after reference checks. A week later, I was helping at Joseph's bar to make some quick cash when Thomas called with news. The publisher wanted to meet with both me and Annie to discuss the situation. They've seen the evidence, he explained. They're not happy about being misled, but they've invested too much in the project to simply cancel it. They want to find a solution that works for everyone. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at the publisher's office. I spent the weekend alternating between anxiety and rehearsing what I wanted to say. I needed to be firm but professional. No emotional outbursts, no matter how much Annie tried to provoke me. Monday arrived, and I dressed in the most professional outfit I could assemble from my limited wardrobe. Thomas met me outside the publisher's building, providing a final pep talk before we headed up to the conference room. Annie was already there, sitting across from a woman I presumed was the publisher. Annie's lawyer sat beside her, looking stern and expensive in a perfectly tailored suit. Annie herself was dressed immaculately as always, but I noticed dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by makeup. For once, she looked like she hadn't been sleeping well either. She didn't acknowledge me when I entered, keeping her eyes fixed on her phone. I sat down across from her, Thomas taking the seat beside me. "Thank you all for coming," began the publisher, introducing herself as Susan. "I've asked for this meeting because we seem to have a situation that needs resolution before we can proceed with this cookbook project." Annie immediately jumped in. "There's no situation. This former employee is making outrageous claims because she's bitter about being fired for incompetence." Susan held up a hand. "Ms. Zrania, I've reviewed the materials provided by both sides, including some concerning video footage from your launch party. I think it's clear there are legitimate questions about the cookbook's authorship." Annie's lawyer leaned forward. "My client has never claimed to personally develop every recipe. Like most celebrity cookbooks, this was always intended to be a collaborative project with Ms. providing the vision and branding." I couldn't help but laugh quietly at this complete revision of history. Annie shot me a venomous look. "That may be," Susan replied diplomatically, "but the contract Annie signed specifically states that she is the principal creator of the content. If that's not the case, we have a problem." Thomas spoke up. "My client isn't looking to derail this project. She simply wants appropriate credit for her work and fair compensation for the hours she put in developing these recipes and photographs." Annie scoffed. "She was paid a salary to assist me. Anything she created during that employment belongs to me." "Actually," Thomas countered, "her employment agreement doesn't include any such language about intellectual property ownership. And even if it did, the hundreds of hours of overtime she worked developing this cookbook far exceeded normal assistant duties." The discussion continued in this vein for nearly an hour, Annie and her lawyer insisting I was trying to extort her, Thomas calmly presenting evidence of my contributions, and Susan mediating while clearly trying to salvage a publishing deal that was rapidly unraveling. Finally, Susan called for a break. Annie immediately left the room with her lawyer, while Susan asked me and Thomas to stay behind. "Off the record," Susan said once we were alone, "I know she's lying. That cooking demonstration video makes it painfully obvious. But she's a valuable brand, and the company has already invested significantly in this project. So what are you suggesting?" I asked. "A compromise. We credit you as the recipe developer and food photographer. Annie remains the face of the cookbook. You both sign non-disparagement agreements, and we pay you a fair rate for your work." I thought about it. It wasn't perfect, but it would give me professional credit I could use to build my career. And honestly, I was exhausted by the whole conflict. I just wanted to move forward. "I can agree to that," I said finally. Susan looked relieved. "Good. Now we just need to convince Annie." That proved more difficult. When Annie and her lawyer returned, they rejected the proposal outright. Annie insisted she wouldn't share credit with the help, and threatened to take her brand to another publisher. Susan remained remarkably calm. "That's your right, of course. But I should mention that breaking our contract would require returning the considerable advance we've already paid you, and any other publisher will want assurances about the content ownership given the concerns that have been raised." I watched as the reality of her situation slowly dawned on Annie. Her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, likely explaining that she had few good options left. After what felt like an eternity, Annie finally spoke. Fine, she can have a credit inside the book as recipe developer, but my name stays alone on the cover, and she signs an NDA about this whole situation, and fair payment for her work, Thomas added firmly. More negotiation followed, but by the end of the meeting, we had a tentative agreement. I would receive credit as the recipe developer and food photographer inside the cookbook, a fair payment for my work, and Annie and I would both sign non-disparagement agreements. As we prepared to leave, Annie pulled me aside, her lawyer and Thomas watching carefully from a distance. You think you've won, she said quietly, her perfect smile never wavering. But trust me, this is just the beginning. There are 1,000 ways I can make your life difficult without ever violating that stupid agreement. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside me. For months, this woman had terrified me. She'd controlled my life, my sense of self-worth, even my perception of reality. But standing there in that conference room, I suddenly saw her clearly, just a deeply insecure person whose entire identity was built on taking credit for other people's work. You know what, Annie? I don't think about you at all. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her mouth slightly open. Outside the building, Thomas congratulated me on standing my ground. The paperwork will take a few days to finalize, but this is a good outcome. You got what you wanted, credit for your work. Thanks for everything, I said sincerely. I couldn't have done this without you. Don't thank me yet, he replied with a small smile. We still need to get your stuff back from Annie's storage unit and find you a new place to live, but one step at a time. As we walked to the subway, I felt lighter than I had in months. The nightmare wasn't completely over. Annie would likely find subtle ways to continue her retaliation, and rebuilding my life and career would take time. But for the first time since I'd accepted that assistant position, I felt like I had some control over my own story. I checked my phone and saw a text from Riley. Heard about the meeting? Dinner to celebrate tonight? A bunch of us are getting together. I smiled and texted back a simple, yes. Maybe some good things had come from this mess after all. New friends who saw value in me beyond what I could do for them, a potential new career direction, and most importantly, the realization that I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. The cookbook would be published in 6 months. My name would be inside, proof that I had created something real and valuable. And whatever Annie tried next, I would face it knowing my worth didn't depend on her or anyone else's validation. As I headed to Riley's dinner gathering that night, the whole situation still felt surreal. I'd stood up to Annie and somehow emerged with my dignity and professional credit intact. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. The dinner turned out to be at this little hole-in-the-wall Italian place. Thomas, Riley, Joseph, and a few other witnesses from the party were already there when I arrived. They cheered when I walked in, which was honestly kind of embarrassing but also nice. The cookbook warrior arrives, Riley called out, raising her wine glass. To standing up to toxic influencers. Everyone clinked glasses while I slid into an empty chair, feeling my face heat up. Thanks, guys, but it's not completely over yet. The paperwork still needs to be finalized. Still worth celebrating, Thomas said, passing me the menu. Not many people stand up to someone like Annie and actually get results. Over pasta and wine, I filled them in on the details of the meeting. The conversation eventually shifted to other topics, and for the first time in forever, I enjoyed just being around people without constantly checking my phone or worrying about Annie's next demand. When I finally got back to Joseph's apartment that night, I crashed hard. The emotional and physical exhaustion of the past few weeks caught up with me all at once. I slept for nearly 12 hours straight. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from an unknown number. They'd left a voicemail, which turned out to be from a cooking magazine editor named Jamie. Hi, I was at Annie's cookbook party and was really impressed by your food. I understand you developed those recipes. I'd love to discuss potential freelance work. Please call me back when you can. I nearly dropped my phone. An actual job opportunity? Without thinking twice, I called back immediately. Jamie answered on the second ring. Hello? I introduced myself, trying to sound professional despite my racing heart. I'm returning your call about potential freelance work? Yes. I'm so glad you called back, Jamie said. Look, I'll be direct. What happened at that party was awful, but everyone I've talked to says the food was excellent. We're looking for fresh recipe developers for our summer issue. Would you be interested? We talked for about 20 minutes. By the end of the call, I had my first freelance assignment to develop 3 seasonal dessert recipes for their July issue. It wasn't much money, but it was legitimate work that would have my name on it. As I hung up, Joseph gave me a thumbs up from the kitchen where he'd been pretending not to eavesdrop. Sounds like good news? I couldn't stop grinning. My first real food writing gig. Small, but it's something. See? Annie didn't ruin your life after all. Over the next week, things started looking up in small ways. I found a tiny but affordable studio apartment. The cookbook paperwork came through, with my name clearly listed as recipe developer and photographer. The payment wasn't life-changing, but it covered my security deposit and first month's rent. But just as I was starting to feel like the worst was behind me, Annie made her next move. I was testing recipes for the magazine assignment when I got a text from Riley. Have you seen Annie's latest Instagram post? Call me. My stomach dropped. I immediately checked Annie's account, which I'd been avoiding. Her most recent post showed her in a professional kitchen, wearing chef whites and standing next to a famous restaurateur. The caption read, "So excited to announce my new cooking show. Can't wait to share my passion for food with all of you. At Food Network #, coming soon." Quote, I called Riley immediately. Please tell me this is a joke. Wish it was, she replied. Apparently the cookbook drama actually increased her follower count. Drama sells. But she can't cook. Everyone at that party saw it. Most of those people signed NDAs, remember? And the public has the memory of a goldfish. She's already spinning the party incident as you being jealous and trying to sabotage her. I paced around my tiny kitchen, fuming. So she just gets away with it? Again? Welcome to influencer world, Riley sighed. Though if it makes you feel better, she'll probably crash and burn when they start filming. You can't fake cooking skills on a live set. It didn't make me feel better. I thought the cookbook settlement meant Annie would at least have to acknowledge my work. But here she was, already moving on to an even bigger platform with 0 consequences. The next day, I received a formal-looking letter. It was from Annie's lawyer, claiming I'd violated the non-disparagement agreement by speaking negatively about Ms. to industry professionals. They demanded I cease all communication about Annie immediately. I forwarded it to Thomas, who called me within the hour. This is an intimidation tactic, he explained. They have no proof because you haven't violated anything. They're just trying to scare you into silence while Annie launches this new venture. So what do? Nothing. Keep doing your work. Document everything but don't engage. She wants a reaction. I tried to follow his advice. I focused on my magazine recipes and started a small food blog to build my portfolio. I even landed a part-time job at a local bakery to supplement my income while I established myself as a freelancer. But Annie wasn't done with me. 2 weeks later, I discovered she'd hired someone to create a fake blog using screenshots of my recipe tests, claiming I was stealing her recipes for my new projects. The site disappeared within 24 hours, probably after Thomas sent a cease and desist. But the damage was done. Several food bloggers I'd been networking with suddenly stopped responding to my emails. Then my apartment building's management called to verify my criminal record that someone had anonymously reported. I had to spend an entire day proving I had no record. The final straw came when the magazine that had hired me for freelance work called to postpone my assignment. The editor was apologetic but vague about the reason. I went straight to Thomas's office without an appointment, probably looking half crazed. She's systematically destroying every opportunity I get, I said as soon as he could see me. This has to qualify as harassment, right? Thomas looked genuinely concerned. It does, but proving it is difficult. She's careful to maintain plausible deniability. So what, I just give up? Move to another city and change my name? He thought for a moment. Not necessarily. Sometimes the best offense is a good offense. What does that mean? It means we might need to be more proactive. Annie's cooking show is her vulnerability. She's building her brand on a skill she doesn't possess. But how does that help me? I already exposed her once and it only made her more popular. Thomas smiled. That was a private party. TV is a different animal entirely. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop with a woman named Susan, not the publisher, but someone who worked in TV production. Riley had connected us. So you're the cookbook ghost, Susan said, studying me over her latte. I've heard rumors about Annie's new show. It's a 6-episode deal. Filming starts next month. And you believe me about her not being able to cook? Susan shrugged. Doesn't matter what I believe. TV is about ratings. But if what you're saying is true, it's going to be a disaster on set. So why are we meeting? Because disasters make for boring television unless they're properly managed. She leaned forward. Look, I can't promise anything, but I might be able to get you a production assistant position on the show. Very behind the scenes, very under the radar. My jaw dropped. You want me to work for Annie? Again? After everything? Not for Annie. For the production company. They're already concerned about her actual cooking abilities. Having someone who knows the truth could be valuable to them. I thought about it. The idea of being anywhere near Annie again made my skin crawl, but the opportunity to witness her facade crumble on a much bigger stage, that was tempting. I'd need guarantees that she couldn't fire me or interfere with my role, I said finally. Susan nodded. Of course. And the production company would need assurances that you're not there to sabotage their show, just to help make good television. I went home and discussed it with Joseph, who thought I was insane to even consider it. Thomas was more practical, pointing out that the position would give me industry connections beyond Annie's reach. After 3 days of internal debate, I called Susan and accepted the offer. The next month was a crash course in TV production. I was hired as a food prep assistant, responsible for gathering ingredients and helping the food stylist. My name was buried in the crew list where Annie was unlikely to notice it. I wore my hair differently and kept my head down during pre-production meetings. The first day of shooting arrived. I arrived at 5 a.m., helping set up the kitchen set before most of the crew arrived. The plan was for Annie to film her introduction and then make a simple pasta dish for her first demonstration. When Annie walked onto the set at 9 a.m., I ducked behind an equipment cart. She looked perfectly put together as always, but I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she studied the kitchen setup. The director walked her through the shooting schedule while I focused on prepping ingredients. The plan was for Annie to cook on camera with minimal cuts or assistance. Authentic cooking was the show's selling point. When the cameras started rolling, Annie was all smiles and charisma, nailing her introduction perfectly. Then came the cooking segment. Just like at the party, it was immediately obvious she had no idea what she was doing. She couldn't dice an onion. She turned the burner too high and nearly started a fire. The pasta stuck together in a gluey mass because she didn't stir it. After 3 disastrous takes, the director called for a break. Annie immediately demanded to speak with the executive producer in private. I continued quietly prepping ingredients for the next segment, straining to overhear their conversation. This isn't working, Annie was saying. The lighting is all wrong, and these knives are terrible. The producer, a no-nonsense woman named Jordan, wasn't buying it. The lighting and knives are fine, Annie, but I'm concerned about the actual cooking. Your contract stated you had culinary expertise. I do. I just need more rehearsal time, and maybe we should consider a different format. More lifestyle, less actual cooking. I couldn't help smiling as I chopped vegetables. The truth was finally catching up to Annie in a way she couldn't control. After lunch, Annie returned with a new demand, a teleprompter with detailed cooking instructions. The production team scrambled to accommodate her, but it only made things more awkward as she robotically read directions while clearly not understanding the techniques she was describing. By the end of day 1, the production was 5 hours behind schedule, and the executive producers were huddled in a corner looking concerned. I was packing up ingredients when Susan approached me. So it's true, she really can't cook. I nodded. Told you. This is a disaster, Susan sighed. We can't produce a cooking show with a host who can't cook. The network will pull the plug. Not my problem, I replied, though I felt a twinge of sympathy for the crew who might lose work. Susan studied me thoughtfully. Actually, it could be your solution. What does that mean? The network has invested a lot in this show. They need content. Annie needs to save face. You need recognition for your skills and to get Annie off your back. I stared at her. You're not suggesting a compromise. You work as the show's actual recipe developer and food consultant, credited properly on screen. You train Annie in basic techniques between shoots. The show gets saved, you get a legitimate credit on a TV show, and Annie gets to maintain her image with minimal embarrassment. It was crazy. Absolutely insane. Work with Annie instead of against her, after everything? But as I thought about it, I realized it might be the perfect solution. A credited position on a TV show would give me professional legitimacy Annie couldn't take away. And the sweet irony of her success depending on my help wasn't lost on me. Annie would never agree to it, I said finally. Susan smiled. Let me worry about that. The network has leverage here. Just be ready for a meeting tomorrow morning. I barely slept that night, imagining all the ways this could backfire. But when I arrived on set the next morning, I found the executive producers, Annie and her manager, waiting in the production office. Annie's face when I walked in was priceless. Shock, followed by fury, followed by careful neutrality when the executive producer began speaking. Thanks for joining us. We've been discussing some challenges with production. Annie has agreed that having an experienced recipe developer on the team would be beneficial for everyone. Annie's smile looked painfully forced. Always happy to collaborate with talented people, she said through gritted teeth. The terms were presented. I would be credited as culinary producer and would develop all recipes for the show. I would work with Annie between filming days to improve her basic cooking skills. In return, everyone would sign new non-disparagement agreements, and the production would move forward with proper support for Annie. Annie barely spoke during the meeting, but her manager was constantly whispering to her. I gathered from fragments I overheard that the network had made it clear this was the only way the show would continue. When everything was settled, Annie and I were left alone in the room momentarily, as everyone else stepped out to finalize paperwork. You planned this somehow, she hissed once we were alone. I shook my head. Nope, just karma finally catching up. You built a career on taking credit for other people's work. Eventually that stops working. This doesn't change anything. I'll still be the star. That's fine. All I ever wanted was credit for my work. Now I'll have it in writing, on screen, where you can't erase it. The show moved forward with the new arrangement. Working with Annie was still challenging. She remained convinced I was out to sabotage her, but professional necessity forced a cold truce between us. I developed recipes she could reasonably execute after practice, and she begrudgingly followed my instructions. The first episode aired 3 months later. True to the agreement, my name appeared in the credits as culinary producer. Several food blogs even mentioned my contributions specifically, noting the impressive recipes. After the 3rd episode aired, I received a job offer from a different cooking show, a legitimate position as a recipe developer with the opportunity to appear on camera occasionally. I accepted immediately. I gave my notice to Annie's show, fulfilling all my contractual obligations. On my last day, Annie approached me as I was cleaning out my workspace. So you're abandoning ship, she said, trying to sound casual. Moving on to better opportunities, I corrected. That's how careers work. She nodded, examining her perfect manicure. You know, you could have just asked for credit from the beginning instead of making such a scene at my party. I couldn't help laughing. I did ask Annie, repeatedly. You said I was just the help and threatened to fire me. She waved her hand dismissively, rewriting history as easily as breathing. Well, anyway, good luck with your whatever it is you're doing next. It wasn't an apology. Annie was probably incapable of genuine remorse, but there was a note of something almost like respect in her voice, the reluctant acknowledgement that I'd managed to turn her attempts to destroy me into stepping stones for my own career. As I walked off that set for the final time, I realized I genuinely didn't care about Annie anymore. She'd continue being exactly who she was, taking shortcuts, claiming credit, manipulating reality to center herself. But her power over my life was gone. 1 year later, I published my own cookbook under my own name. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was authentic. My recipes, my photos, my voice. Annie's show lasted 2 seasons before being canceled, but by then I was too busy with my own projects to pay attention. Sometimes people ask if I regret working for Annie, given all the drama. I always say the same thing. I don't regret the experience, just how long I tolerated the disrespect. Because in the end, Annie taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. No job is worth sacrificing your dignity, and the truth has a way of coming out eventually, even in the carefully curated world of social media.